Thank you so much for tuning in. So for those that don't know me, my name is Sophia Oregano and I am one of the senior directors here at Synergy. Synergy is a global accommodation provider, providing corporations with global accommodation wherever they need in the world. And so today we are sticking with the theme on India. And there has been so much interest over the past few years because we've seen a huge surge in demand. And so this isn't not only about international travelers moving to India, but we're also going to speak a lot around domestic travelers and those inter-country moves. So without further ado, I am so excited to welcome Pooja Prithiani to our podcast. Pooja, if you would like to just give a brief introduction.
Hi, Sophia. Hi, everyone. I'm Pooja Prithiani. I'm a client network manager for supply chain at SIRVA Relocations for the Asia Pacific region. I've been with the company since 2020, and I manage vendor relationships and service delivery for some of our key clients in this region. And I'm also the regional APAC lead for temporary housing and global lead for transportation services for the organization.
Thanks, Pooja. And I think it's so great, to have you on this podcast, really acting as a kind of conduit between, those clients and the accounts that you manage, but also representing suppliers in terms of their capabilities. So we're really excited to kind of unpack some of that as we move through this conversation. Before we get started, I know you are recently back from an amazing trip to Mumbai. So I just wanted to ask you, how was it? Is there anything that you want to share about your trip?
It was a very good, very interesting trip. So I went to two locations. I went to Mumbai and Amritsar, which is sort of one of the tier 2 cities or tier 3 cities in India. And so I got to really see the difference between how the two operate. So the tier 1 cities, of course, are the metro cities, the ones that have really major economies, lots of movement and lots of great infrastructure. And I remember, over the past couple of years that I've gone to India, or the last time I went there years ago, it's really changed a lot. They've really boosted their investment, I think, into the infrastructure. You have these bridges and lots of nice roads to get from place to place. So one of those roads that I actually went on was called the Coastal Road. So it's basically from the south to west side. It takes usually about 2 hours to get there. But with this road opening, they expect it to take about 40 minutes. So that is one of the routes that I took. And it was actually really beautiful. It was really well made, lots of nice lights, and it's an undersea tunnel. So it's something that's, I think, out of the ordinary for India. It's the first of its kind. So it was really interesting to see that. And I also noticed a lot of, banks have opened up in Mumbai, and they've really, they have these massive buildings. There's one that we passed by actually, and I was told that next to it was a 5-star hotel. But if you compare the two, the bank building actually looked like the 5-star property compared to the hotel. So it's just really interesting to see how it's changed over the past years. I've seen it as, very open land and now very metro with a lot of different buildings coming up and continuing to build and expand as well. It's an interesting, insightful trip.
It just speaks to, how fast and how rapid India is changing. It's challenging to keep on top of. And I think, to your point around the tier 1 and tier 2 cities, I've been having lots of discussions recently about the tier 1 cities. They're so established, they're so full, and things like the transportation, the commute, the journey, because these cities are just having to grow outwards. And so there seems to be a lot of excitement surrounding the second and the third tier cities in terms of what does that infrastructure look like in the future, because really that's, I guess, the way in which India is going to go in terms of, the hubs, etc. So just great to kind of hear, particularly with you being there so recently, that you can actually see so much of that change. And I think it's so exciting.
It definitely, it is. It's been a city over the past 10 years that's really been expanding and expanding, and year on year, you have the growth that is unparalleled. I was just doing a volume comparison, and pre-COVID, for example, we had, you know, a lot of volume already in this location. And then there's like 100% increase post-COVID. So between 2021 to 2022, I think the volume that we saw increased by 100% in this location. And a lot of that, like you said earlier, was about domestic volume that is also coming in. So it is definitely a growing market. And in fact, according to the World Bank, for example, I think they came out with a report earlier this month where it said that India is actually the fastest growing economy, I guess, in Asia right now.
I think we're seeing it too. And for those people that are tuned in, I'm sure, there's a lot of interest and people are seeing a similar thing, right? There is this explosion within India. And then some of, APAC as a region on the whole, some of the what was, the Singapores, that's slower, but we're starting to again see these second and third tier countries, Vietnam, Malaysia, Sri Lanka. So it just, I think, speaks to, the future and where people really need to focus when it comes to opportunities and considering their footprint and their infrastructure. So let's talk about India then. So you touched a little bit about kind of the growth that you've seen. What does that growth look like for you? Let's talk about what you're seeing actually within India today.
So, I mean, if you do the research, if you actually just do some background, some very basic things, right? So India is actually now the most populated country in the world. It's already superseded China. So you have a population of about 1.45 billion people. China is at about 1.42 billion people. And if you compare that to the world, that's about 18% of the world population, which is a huge, huge chunk. So it's obviously, I mean, it's a natural progression to have companies who want to be in India, who want to invest in India, and who want to have their presence in that market. So, while I was there as well, when I met with our partners, one of the things that they did talk about was Ford actually just last month announced that they will be reopening their manufacturing plant in India. And, this is kind of big news as well because they exited the market actually about 2 to 3 years ago where they weren't meeting the volumes then. So for them to kind of make a re-entry into the market, and this is for export, this is not necessarily for domestic sale. They've not talked about, opening in India so they could sell domestically, but they want to open the manufacturing plant so they can export globally with it being manufactured there. And so this also means in their statement, they talked about how this will create about 3,000 job opportunities in that region alone, in Chennai alone. And this is one company that we're talking about, so with that, we can see that obviously companies are seeing the potential in India. And I think this also has a lot to do with the Prime Minister's plan, or he had a campaign which he launched in 2014, Prime Minister Modi, called the Make in India campaign. And this was his mega push for a manufacturing, to make India a manufacturing hub, basically. I think in the 80s and 90s, India missed the mark or missed the opportunity to become one of the manufacturing hubs. And that's when China kind of took over. You have, Vietnam, Malaysia, these countries who really took that opportunity in the 80s and 90s to make manufacturing very easy or make it easier to do business in these countries. So now India is taking that approach on, and his campaign is all about, come here. It's his invite to the investors to manufacture all your products here in India. And, in the past 10 years, you can see the numbers because of this campaign. You have the defense sector actually grew by 21 times. One of the most, or the biggest impact is actually on the mobile handset industry, whereas 10 years ago in 2014, you had 10% of the mobile phones or smartphones being used in India, manufactured in India, whereas now it's almost 100%. You have the manufacturing plants who were maybe 2 in 2014, they're at about 200 and growing now, just in the last 10 years. So the growth is really, really significant. And I think it also has a lot to do with this campaign that the Prime Minister is pushing. And, the government is also making it more inviting for investors and entrepreneurs to make it easier to manufacture in India as well. So I think that's where a lot of the growth comes in. Now, whether it's, successful in terms of globally, that's yet to be seen. But of course, in terms of the numbers, it shows the growth already in India.
Yeah, I mean, it's staggering, isn't it? And actually, just in 10 years to hear some of those statistics, is just, it's so smart how it's been done. And I think, just touching on some of the industries that you've mentioned, you can just see here that big picture kind of set of verticals. You mentioned banks within Mumbai, and the way in which that, you had observed them on your recent trip, manufacturing, defense. I think as well, some of the movement, particularly within the accommodation space, has largely been driven by the tech sector, by semiconductors. So it's, like I say, it really is so diverse. And I think it would be really exciting to watch kind of what happens now over the next 5 and 10 years. But those macro impactors are really what plays a huge part in the success and the growth of the economy within India.
It's such an exciting time. And I know that they have their goals. I know this campaign also has its goals, and I'm not sure that they're quite there yet. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, and of course you have, that period of COVID in between that kind of course, changes the course or the changes the numbers a little bit. But, all the things that I'm seeing in India, all the developments that I'm seeing, all the movement in terms of our volumes and all of that, it is a market to watch for sure.
Definitely. I think that goes without saying. So if we pare this back down to our industry, and how are you seeing this growth impact your organization? Kind of what are some of the steps that you've been taking to kind of ensure your success?
So, generally, obviously, when an economy grows and the volume grows, there's a growth in, job opportunities as well. It is definitely our role as an RMC to make sure that we and our suppliers are kind of ready for that volume that comes in, whether it's steadily or, within a shorter period of time. So what we do as it is, we always have a, very stringent sourcing process. So we make sure that our suppliers are ready for the volume. We make sure they have the quality and the pricing, of course, that will meet the market's needs. And then on top of that, like for India specifically, we actually have more than just a few partners to help us manage that volume. Whereas traditionally, you have RMCs that have a primary supplier and then you have an alternate supplier. And most of the movement will go to the primary because they can take all that volume, and you have very little that goes to the alternate. In this case, in India, I think all of our partners actually have enough to go around for all of them and to efficiently manage that volume, which I think is the best solution really to manage and to deliver what our clients expect.
Yeah, looking at the volumes, looking at, even within that volume, the different scope of work that you're handling. I think it's really smart to be able to, open up your pool, look at your clients' criterias, identify, where does that align with a said supplier, and really leverage that, because that's really when you're going to start seeing success in terms of the delivery. So I think it's, a message to us all as well that the landscape has changed. It's very competitive. There are a lot of new corporate housing providers, and particularly when it comes to India, we have to think about not only what's your offering, what does your footprint look like? What does your infrastructure within the country look like? Because we know that that's also really, really important, but also other elements, in terms of, GST registration, etc. So I think it's always wise, isn't it, to keep on top of all the players within the market, and then to be able to align based upon what it is that your clients need.
Exactly. And that is part of what we do. We try to find out what the client is looking for, and we pair them with the right vendors that will deliver what they're looking for as well. And on top of that, I think it's so important to have these amazing relationships with the vendors and the clients as well, so that you can have these open conversations and open communication about the needs and about improvements that need to be made to make sure that both are aligned and delivering in the best possible capability.
Yeah, I think transparency, and I've mentioned this before, it's always going to be the key, isn't it, in terms of, and it wouldn't be a podcast about India if we didn't touch on cost. And I know that we're going to kind of move towards that. But I think when you talk about cost and ways in which you can try to contain that, it's really important that you're balancing that with transparent communications. And so I think it can be a win-win, but it does all boil down to the communication and the transparency about what that product looks like, what the offering looks like, etc.
Yeah, exactly. And that is what I see with a lot of our clients as well, is that cost containment is a huge priority for them. So they're now having these contingency plans to make sure they're always prepared. And so obviously cost is a factor. But the thing that I feel that, I'm sure Synergy does, and I think we do as an RMC as well, is we like to focus on the value adds as well, rather than just the cost. Because at the end of the day, of course, we know that, that's important. Pricing is important. Costing is important. We always do what we can to make sure that we are competitive price wise. But I also notice that clients will not sacrifice an employee experience for cost. So this is always, something that we remember, and then we make sure we're talking about how we add value. Or even, let's say, in temporary housing case, we talk about the different options that we can provide and the different services that you can provide. When there are escalations, for example, you're there to handhold them, to take that stress away. So it's about giving a seamless experience, which, is definitely, I think, more important than just the cost.
Experience is everything. And so there might be some kind of tangible kind of costs, but then there's also the other side to the value that you can't always put a price on, but it's really going to mean that the productivity and the overall experience that guest has is going to be, really high, and therefore that's going to bode well for the company, because at the end of this is an investment for them. They want to impress these people, they want to keep them, they want them to be happy. And so I agree with you that the experience being frictionless is so important. And just back on one of your points around, the value adds, we're seeing it more and more. Buyers are pushing the industry to not only think about what it is that you've always done, because that's not the way of the world moving forward. So what other services can you provide to us that's going to help us to be more efficient? So, I'm really quite passionate about this conversation. I've been having a lot of these discussions recently about, well, talk to me. And as an RMC, I guess you have all your service lines, and it's something you're probably the experts in. But I think there is a shift as well within, well, what other services might that guest want that you could consider offering to them that's going to make my life easier for me as someone who's managing the program? So,
yeah, innovation at this moment is so key, finding sort of something to offer the clients or the employees that not everybody can finding ways to make life easier for them. We're in an age of convenience. So convenience is definitely another factor that we need to always incorporate in our dealings with clients and employees and our vendors and everything.
So let's talk a little bit about the second and third tier cities. I know they've kind of cropped up in the conversation, but what do you anticipate? Where are you hearing? If you could kind of give some top tips to those people listening in terms of, what those smart cities might look like, where would you put your money?
So I've seen a lot of requests or movement into cities like Noida, Gurgaon, which are kind of Delhi, but outskirts of Delhi. So I think in those cities, there's a lot of movement. Other cities that I've seen more requests into now is Ahmedabad, which is not really a tier 2 city. I think it's still considered a tier 1 city, but not as big as Hyderabad or Bangalore, which sees a lot of volume. And that's because in Ahmedabad, I think they are expecting a lot of banking companies to be moving into that city or to be offering services in that city. So in anticipation, we are seeing a lot of moves into this location as well. Other than that, there are some other, outskirt locations, I guess, for domestic moves or for intern populations. You see them moving out of the tier two cities into the locations where the offices are held. But also, once you see a lot of volume or once you see a lot of intern population in one tier two city, there tends to be movement there because then they do their skills development programs in that location instead of having them move out to the tier one city. So there's a lot of different things happening around India, around the tier two and three cities, because the population density in the tier one cities are also quite high. You need that space in these other outskirt locations to continue to develop in the local.
I think what you've mentioned, the other one that I hear about quite a lot is Jaipur in terms of some of the
Yes.
development that's happening there. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. And just to kind of close this off, I mean, I've really just enjoyed kind of, teasing out all of your expertise, how you're looking at your sourcing process as well as what you're anticipating moving forward. So I want to say a huge thank you for being our guest. And I want to close by asking you, do you have a favorite city in India? And if so, what is it and why?
You know what? I will tell you, Mumbai would be my favorite city in India. And it has a lot to do with personal, thing. My family is there. So it's always a good time when I'm in Mumbai. It's an amazing experience. But in terms of city, meaning like the environment and everything, I actually quite like Bangalore. Bangalore, I've only been there once, but it was such a lovely experience there. I've heard that the weather there is, you know, amazing all year round. It's not hot like the rest of India. It's always pretty cool and pretty mellow. And, you have one area there that's very congested because of that's where all the companies are. I think that's where all the offices are and everything. But if you go to the outskirts of Bangalore, just an hour away or 2 hours away, it's such a nice, developed city, lots of things to do. Those are the two cities that I'd always recommend, Mumbai or Bangalore.
We have a lot of our team in India based in Bangalore, and they are always talking about the weather and how grateful that they are that they don't necessarily experience some of the kind of intenseness within the rest of India.
Yeah. But culturally speaking, I mean, you have Chennai, which is also very beautiful. They have a lot of beautiful temples, and it has the best coffee in India.
Does it? Okay, there we go, everyone. Top tip, best coffee, go to Chennai. Okay, well, thank you to everyone for listening. There is going to be more to come, and I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. A huge thank you to Pooja. We've absolutely loved having you as our guest, so thank you so much.
Thank you as well, Sophia. Thank you, Synergy, for having me today.